ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו. Of course, one should start from the beginning. And it makes sense that the Torah starts from the beginning. The beginning of what? The beginning of the world. How the world was created. But after a few paragraphs, that's the end of that. And we start with the story of the patriarchs, of Noah, and so on. The story of humanity, really. Actually, one of our great commentators, and I mentioned this in other opportunities as well, says the Torah shouldn't start from this creation. The Torah should really start from the first instruction God gave to the Jewish people, because the Torah is a book of laws. So why do you have all these stories? You should start really from the beginning. And if it started from the beginning, maybe it should have started by saying there is a God, we should serve this God, He created the world. But that is not really what the Torah is telling us. I think that if you study the first book of the Torah, which is Bereshit, you find that most of it has to do with what our patriarchs did. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and his wives, his children, and so on. Their activities, their problems, their suffering, their good times, their bad times, this is the story of the Torah. It made me think about something altogether different, because what came first, language or grammar? Obviously language. What is grammar? Grammar is an invention, a human invention, to try to understand the language that we use, to normalize it somehow, to establish certain rules by which we speak really. Do you mean to say that first we sat down and wrote a number of rules? You know, these are the rules, and now we're going to speak according to these rules? Actually, we did that. It's called Esperanto. There was a language that was created artificially. It was created with a perfect grammar. You know, in any language, in English, you know, you write one way, you pronounce another way. There are always exceptions to the rule. In Esperanto, there are no exceptions to the rule. Everything follows the rule. So what came first? Obviously, first came language, and then we superimposed a set of rules that we call grammar in order to understand better language. You know, our rabbis say about the patriarchs, you know, that they obeyed the Torah. They lived by the Torah. Now, how is that possible? They lived before the Torah was given. So how is that possible? What came first? First came the patriarchs, then came the Torah. In other words, the Torah is something that was written, given to the Jewish people centuries afterwards. Moshe received the Torah on Mount Sinai. But if we take the analogy with language, maybe we can look at it in a different way. That the Torah is actually the grammar of language. What the Torah tries to do is, in a certain way, put down in laws, in norms, the behavior of our ancestors. In other words, they are really the prototypes. They are really the samples. They are really the north toward which we have to aspire. Why does the Torah spend so much time in telling us what Abraham did? It shows us, for instance, that Abraham is worried about his nephew Lot. But he's also worried about the people of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah. They're not Jews. Well, there were no Jews at the time. He's not worried only about his family. He's worried about all of humanity. It shows us that he had doors in all directions so that anybody that passed by his home could receive some food, some shelter if he needed. He showed us what he did. Isaac showed us that sacrifice is very important. Jacob had problems with his family. Their behavior in a certain way sets the rules by which we have to govern ourselves. So the Torah may be interpreted as, listen, here are the patriarchs. Now I'm going to formalize it. You know, these are the set of rules that explain why these people behaved in a certain way. So now, when we study the Torah, what we're really trying to do maybe is to learn how Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob behaved, because they are the samples. They are really the models that we have to follow in our lives. That's why at all times we always say, this is our God, the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why do you repeat that all the time? The Torah is there already. Because actually, maybe the Torah is, in essence, normalizing, putting in legal form the behavior of these patriarchs. Of course, there are many more things in the Torah. Of course, there are many more. But the basis is the behavior of these people. And these people were exceptional. Because in the beginning, God created the world. There was a man by the name of Adam, but he fell in disgrace. There was Noah, who was very fine, but somehow he wasn't able to transmit what he had learned about the existence of one God. It was only at the time of Abraham that we see already continuity. Maybe this is another thing that you have to learn. There must be continuity. You must teach your children. So when the Torah tells you, Veshinantam levanecha, teach your children, it is actually formalizing what Isaac did with Jacob, what Abraham did with Isaac. In other words, the Torah is really giving us in a scientific, in a legal, in a normalized way, the lives of the patriarchs. And maybe this is why, to this day, we always say that we are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even though they preceded the Torah. The Torah came afterwards, because the Torah interprets their lives. So you want to fulfill the Torah? Study the Torah, of course. But remember, the model is really Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you are like them, you're going to be a very good son of the Torah, a bar mitzvah.